Dimension 315Q's version of Earth is starkly different from our own in some ways, though similar in others. This Earth lacks a moon, having only a planetary ring in its place, the result of a massive asteroid collision a few million years in the past. From this structure rains large and small meteors at regular intervals, wreaking havoc on the surface below. We focus today on this Earth's version of Australia. The intelligent species which dominates this landmass is not Homo sapiens, but rather a type of humanoid creature closely resembling the emu. Centuries prior, a group of these emu people known as the Pir formed a state known as the Turikai Empire, which at times controlled nearly half of Australia. But after facing endless crises from within and without, at the hands of both emu and nature, this empire fell to ruin. The once vibrant capital, known as Iktu, now controls only a small area of land known as the Aqti, or meaning the autonomous state of Aqti, or more literally, state of Aqti, intentionally walking onward in its own success. The language of the core of the old empire was known as Raaatqqqqq, and although the language spoken by the modern-day period of Raaatqqqqq is only partially mutually intelligible with the other descendants of the classical language of the period, it still goes by the same name. It is this language which will occupy the remainder of the discussion. We'll start our explanation of Raaatqqqqq by going over its phonology. For the sake of familiarity, we'll first go over its phonemes, although this is not the primary lens by which native Pir linguists analyze the basic components of speech. Also, keep in mind that representations of the sounds of Raaatqqqqq are only a best approximation, as human phonology differs from emu person phonology on account of their distinct vocal anatomy. Approximately, the phonemic consonants are ba, bra, ta, ra, ka, and ra. Allophones include ba, ta or cha, ka, ba, ra, and ra, with as an epenthetic sound between vowels, and appearing exclusively in the vocative marker. All of these consonants are mildly pharyngealized. The vowels are e, and u, with appearing epenthetically to avoid consonant clusters. The syllable structure is phonemically analyzed as CVC with optional consonants, but CV is more accurate given the epenthesis of glottal stops and schwas. The labial, alveolar, and uvular consonants are grouped together with e, and u respectively for the purposes of some morphological phenomena. But in our analysis of Raaatqqqqq, the chronemes are arguably more important. Chronemes are units of length rather than specific sounds, with a higher degree chroneme equaling a longer vowel or consonant, or a higher number of contacts in the case of trilled consonants. Chronemically, the only categories to which a chroneme belongs are the degree and whether the chroneme is a vowel or consonant. Although chronetically, a consonant chroneme behaves differently depending on whether the phoneme is a trill or a stop. Vowel chronemes go 1 degree higher than consonants, and there are some gaps in the number of contacts in trills. The chronemes are a, ch, ta, atta, and atta, with allocrones of the same consonant chronemes manifesting in the trills as ra, 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 and ra. In Raaatqqqqq, chronemes are often analyzed as the primary units of speech, with the corresponding phonemes acting more as suprasegmentals. Two words with the same chronemes often have a related meaning, whether those are vague similarities in the case of nouns, different inflections of the same base for prepositions, or something in between for verbs. However, this is not always the case, with unrelated homochrones being common, especially in short words. The chronotactics of Raaatqqqqq are mostly free, although V1 is restricted. A V1 and another V chroneme of the same phoneme can't follow one another in the same word. If this happens, they will instead fuse into one V chroneme, the length being the sum of the constituents plus 1. If the sum is 8 or 9, the last 2 degrees of length break into a separate V2 chroneme, which comes second in the resulting sequence of 2 chronemes. In rapid speech, this can sometimes even apply across word boundaries, and 2 or more V1s cannot exist in succession within a word even if they're of different phonemes. In accordance with the greater importance of chronemes in Raaatqqqqq, the writing system is a sort of abugida in which the main components are the chronemes and their corresponding phonemes provide diacritics. The vowel chroneme symbols occupy the upper section of the text space, while consonants occupy the lower section, with chronemes of the same word being connected together by a center line. There's also a neutral phoneme, which is a phoneme whose identity is indeterminate without context, matching the math group of a preceding or succeeding phoneme. These are most common in suffixes and clitics. The vocative marker, which marks vocative statements, including imperatives and interjections, is written with its own symbol at the beginning of the sentence. For ease of identification, the simple Latin transliteration will be used throughout this presentation, in which a chroneme-phoneme combination is written as the closest letter representing the phoneme, repeated as many times as the degree of the chroneme. Some general grammatical features of Raaatqqqqq are as follows. The word order is strictly VSO, there is no grammatical gender of any kind, prepositions are used rather than postpositions, inflection occurs predominantly through stem changes and suffixes, and there are no articles. The bulk of our analysis of the grammar will be organized by parts of speech. Let's start with the nouns. Nouns in Raaatqqqqq are quite simple. They're not inflected for case in any way, and there are no noun classes based on gender or otherwise. Plurals are formed through stem changes. Although the process for deriving plurals was obvious and systematic in pre-classical Raaatqqqqq, a millennium of sound changes has rendered them opaque, so they must be learned along with the singular forms. For loanwords, which comprise only about 10% of Raaatqqqq's vocabulary, plurals are either directly borrowed from the donor language or the same as the singular. In informal speech, plurals are not always used for inanimate nouns, meaning anything that isn't a person, animal, celestial object, or large body of water. Diminutives are formed via reduplication of the beginning of the word up to the first vowel or consonant, whichever comes first, or only the first vowel if the word contains no consonants. Augmentatives are formed by adding one of a few endings depending on the word, shown on screen now. Moving on to pronouns, the personal pronouns of Raaatqqqq are as follows. First person singular is acha, second person singular is ibra, third person singular animate is et, third person singular inanimate is iata, first person plural inclusive is attaru, first person plural exclusive is attar, second person plural is ubrat, third person plural animate is akap, and third person plural inanimate is akapa. There are no distinctions for gender or formality, and verb conjugations corresponding to the first person plural do not differentiate between inclusive and exclusive, nor are there any differences in verb conjugation for animacy. Next are the demonstrative determiners, shown in this table. There are 7 levels of distinction. Near the speaker, both inclusive and exclusive of the addressee, near the addressee, at a third location within the side of the speaker, inclusive and exclusive of the side of the addressee, a known location out of sight of the speaker, and an unknown location. To form a demonstrative pronoun, such as this in "this is my explanation," simply take the corresponding determiner and follow it up with the dummy pronoun, aka, which is also used as the object of a verb phrase to form a sort of phrasal verb. Demonstrative adverbs and prepositions will be described in the prepositions section. Now we'll discuss verbs. Verbs are conjugated for person, number, tense, and voice. Each verb has an infinitive form with one of 5 suffixes, each of which have a set of regular changes for conjugation, except in the case of a small number of irregular verbs. Each combination of person, number, and tense has a given suffix. Verbs conjugate for first, second, and third person singular and plural, and there are 10 tense distinctions, ordered from past to future as prehistoric past, historic past, distant past, recent past, hodiernal past, present, hodiernal future, near future, distant future, and unlimited future. Transitive verbs have separate infinitives for active, middle, and passive voice. An infinitive of one voice can be changed into another through systematic stem changes, although the rules for these stem changes are quite complex and have many exceptions, so it's easier to think of these related infinitives as separate words entirely. Aspect is not explicitly marked, although it can be indicated by placing the primary verb in the infinitive and preceding it with a conjugated form of to do for the perfective aspect and to go for the imperfective. To nominalize an action, replace the infinitive suffix with the suffix abrut, similarly to the suffix shun in English. To form an agent noun from a verb, like runner from run, replace the suffix with uaktab or ichai, depending on the word. Neither of these verb nominalizations call for any change in the overarching clausal structure. Simply replace the verb with a nominalization and keep all else equal. A verb is negated by placing the word uch directly after it, or u if the next word begins with a consonant. If one wants to discuss multiple verb phrases which apply to the same subject, as often happens for reasons which will be discussed shortly, The conjunction uwa is placed between the verb phrases. Moving on to adjectives, they're not a distinct class of words which exist in Raaatqqqqq. Instead, nouns are specified exclusively through relative clauses and prepositions. If one wanted to describe person A as tall, they would say something like, person A raises their head high into the air. A situation isn't frustrating. It causes one to want to kick a boulder, and the painful feeling one would receive if they were to literally do so would be, feeling brings agony upon one's leg. Relative clauses are structured the same as an independent clause, and they simply replace the spot of a lone noun in the overarching sentence. Adverbs don't really exist as a distinct class of words either. Since there are no adjectives per se, no adverbs derived from adjectives exist. There are words which could technically be classified as adverbs, but the line between those words and prepositions is blurred, and they're inflected in the same way. Aside from those, the function of adverbs is performed by stacking verbs on top of each other. The phrase walk quietly would instead be worded as walk and not make sound. Now onto the prepositions. The use of prepositions in both noun phrases and verb phrases is extremely common in Raaatqqqqq, being the primary way to add specificity in many contexts. Prepositions are formed from a few different parts: the base, the directness indicator, and optional suffixes for iterative aspect and a few measures of value and moral character. The most important part of a preposition is the base. The base is a template composed of a series of chronemes which details the basic nature of the preposition. The base can indicate an abstract relationship, a level of demonstrative spatial deixis, or a physical location or orientation with a degree which specifies the amount to which that location is occupied. For example, given the location above, there are separate bases for whether the entity in question is directly on top of the point of reference, overlapping with the top of the point of reference, far above the point of reference, etc. This holds for all meaningful combinations of location and degree. The other basic part of a preposition is the directedness indicator. The directedness indicator provides the phonemes which are inserted into the template. The directedness can be simple, meaning no further specificity is provided to the base, non-literal, which makes the base metaphorical, static, or any number of movement directions, such as toward, away, through, etc. If there is a direction of movement, its telicity must be specified, meaning the number of states in which the movement could be considered to be completed. If there is no state of completion, the direction is atelic. If there is a specific state at which the relationship is satisfied, the direction is monotelic. If there are any number of states at which the relationship is satisfied, the direction is polytelic. To illustrate, the preposition front touching toward atelic signifies that the entity is moving toward the front surface of the reference point, but that an instance of movement is not being completed in any meaningful way. The relationship toward the front surface simply exists. If instead it were front touching toward monotelic, it would mean that the movement is completed at some specific moment or in a singular manner. Front touching toward polytelic would indicate that the movement can be completed, but that the contact between the entity and the reference point could happen in multiple specific ways, or that the movement itself may vary rather than being directed only toward the reference point. There are a few optional suffixes which may be applied to the main part of a preposition. The first of these is iterative aspect. In non-static prepositions, this describes whether instances of the action being described exist as discrete steps or continuous bursts, and whether these happen in a simulfactive, regularly repeated, or habitually but irregularly repeated fashion. The suffix for iterative aspect is a vowel chroneme with a degree from 2 to 7 depending on the combination, with a neutral phoneme. If iterative aspect is not marked but subsequent suffixes are applied, the chroneme is degree 1. The next suffix is a combined morpheme for harm alignment and intentionality. There are 16 different suffix components for harm alignment. The correct suffix depending on whether the relationship described by the preposition harms, has no net effect, helps, or has an unknown or irrelevant effect with respect to the relevant value or goal, as experienced by the agent and the patient in the case of a transitive verb, the experiencer in the case of an intransitive verb, and the preceding and succeeding noun in the case of a noun phrase. It's important to note that the harm alignment describes the outcome of the relationship rather than the intention. The phoneme of the vowel chroneme in this suffix is determined by the intentionality of the relationship, which indicates whether the party most responsible for the existence of the relationship created it unavoidably, intentionally, or accidentally. If the intentionality is unknown, the vowel is neutral and its chroneme is shortened. The final suffix is desiredness. If the outcome of the relationship is desired by the most responsible party, the suffix ba is added. And if the outcome is against the responsible party's desires, the correct suffix is chu. These are derived from the words for yes, ba, and no, chu, respectively. Taking into account every combination of every productive component, that is, about 30 bases times 8 degrees times 8 directions times 3 telicities times 6 iterative aspects times 16 harm alignments times 3 intentionalities times 2 statuses of desiredness, there are over 3 million different prepositions which can be constructed, and that's not even counting combinations where some components are unmarked. Of course, some of those combinations are functionally redundant, like versions of north toward versus south away, but even the redundant combinations provide subtly different shades of emphasis. Let's go over an example. Fly, third singular present, here inclusive toward monotelic, continuous semifactive, catastrophic unavoidable, embrace active infinitive, angel augmentative. This sentence means a large meteor, literally a great embracing angel, is flying toward our present location in a singular motion, inevitably reaching it and bringing harm to both itself and anyone or anything in the area. Let's look at one more example, this time for a noun phrase. Termites, in through, static, parasitic, intentional, desired, trunk, of, bodily, simple, tree. This phrase means termites inside and outside of a tree trunk of their own volition in a way which benefits them and harms the tree trunk, this fact being in line with their intentions. Moving on to the conjunctions, there isn't much about them which is unusual enough to draw attention to, or that hasn't already been mentioned. We will draw attention to one fun little dynamic. When forming similes, there are 4 different equivalents of the English word like, depending on whether the quality of one entity is being compared to another quality of itself or a quality of another, and whether the quality in question has been demonstrated in reality or is only hypothetical. As in, you eat toast like you eat apples, versus you eat toast like it's your last meal, versus you eat toast like a vulture eats a goat carcass, versus you eat toast like you're a starving crocodile in a public pool on Memorial Day weekend. Finally, we'll go over some useful vocabulary which hasn't been mentioned. Raaatqqqqq uses a base 12 number system, and large numbers scale up in myriads. Ordinals are formed by adding the suffix pi, and fractions with the suffix piat. The pir have a native way of writing numbers, but after making contact with travelers from our dimension, they sometimes use Arabic numerals and the Latin capital letters A and B. The numbers are shown in this table, and the interrogatives are shown in this table. Finally, we present a passage of prose poetry to give you a bit more of a feel for the Raaatqqqqq language.